So in this video, we're going to talk about perception biases and how they show up in the workplace and recommendations for what organizations and business leaders can do to mitigate the impact of those biases. So if you're not familiar, a perception bias refers to the tendency for us to interpret and judge people in ways that align with our own preconceived notions, beliefs, expectations, and things like that. So this can often lead to distorted or inaccurate understandings of people, what they're doing, why they're doing them, and oftentimes can lead to essentially forms of discrimination in the workplace. So we're going to talk about 6 types of perception biases today. First, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias occurs when we seek out or interpret information that confirms beliefs that we already hold, while simultaneously ignoring or downplaying evidence that contradicts those perspectives. So what employers and business leaders can do in the workplace is to encourage employees to seek out and consider information that contradicts their preconceived beliefs. And this can be done by promoting a culture of open-mindedness and critical thinking. And companies could even implement structured decision-making processes that require the consideration of multiple perspectives before a business decision gets made. Number 2 is the halo effect. So the halo effect occurs when we have an overall positive impression of a person based on one positive characteristic or experience that we had with them, which influences our perception of other unrelated traits and behaviors. So what companies can do is implement objective and transparent evaluation criteria for performance appraisals, hiring processes, promotion decisions, and other personnel-related decisions in the workplace. Organizations should also train their managers to recognize and mitigate the influence that the halo effect can have by focusing on specific, measurable achievements rather than their general impressions about a person. Number 3 is the horn effect. So the horn effect is the opposite of the halo effect. So the horn effect occurs when we hold a negative perspective about a person holistically based on either a negative experience or some negative piece of information that we have about them, and we kind of broadly apply that to the totality of how we see that person. So similarly, using objective criteria for evaluation and business decisions will help mitigate the horn effect. Companies should also encourage leaders to look at the whole picture and not let one negative trait or experience about a team member overshadow their overall performance. Number 4 is anchoring bias. The anchoring bias occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information that we gather or the first experience that we have with the person in making our decisions about how we perceive them. So this is one of the reasons why I've always disliked the saying that first impressions are everything. Obviously, I understand the value of first impressions, but we have to be careful not to let that first impression truly influence and set the stage for how we see that person, which then causes us to be biased and ignore all the other experiences that we may have with them and the other information about who they are as a person, whether positive or negative. So to mitigate this, organizations can provide training on the anchoring effect and encourage employees to consider a range of possibilities or values or outcomes before making a decision that's going to affect a person or team member in the workplace. Individuals, especially leaders, should use multiple data points and benchmarks to avoid relying too heavily on initial information or their first impressions. This is also important in job interviews as well. So, not allowing that first interview or first impression to really influence your ability to interpret all the information that you'll gather about that person afterwards. Number 5 is the recency effect. So this occurs when we place too much information, or too much importance, I should say. Number 5 is the recency effect. This occurs when we place too much importance on the most recent information that we've received or the most recent experience that we've had with the person, rather than considering all available data and experiences equally. So I know I've experienced this as an HR professional where I'll ask a business leader, how is Albert doing? You recently said he was struggling and you weren't sure if this was going to work out. And they'll say, oh, Albert's doing a great job. He's an amazing team member. We recently had a project where he was showing great teamwork and initiative, and I'm really excited to see him turn things around. And I'll say, great. Then a month or two later, I'll ask, how's Albert doing? Is he still performing well? And are you still satisfied with the output? And they'll say, oh man, Albert's doing horrible. I just don't think he's a good team member, or maybe he's not a good fit here. We recently had a project and things didn't go well and he didn't show up the way that we expected him to. And sometimes that's a really hard thing to fight because especially if you want to give people the benefit of the doubt, you may often find yourself looking for that next positive behavior. Or on the flip side, you may just put too much emphasis on that negative thing because maybe it caused a lot of stress or strain or frustration. And this could be an overall strong team member, but maybe they really dropped the ball and missed the mark on something recently. And because you're in the middle of dealing with that fire, if you're asked to do an evaluation or give feedback on that person, you're going to have to fight that urge to focus so much on what's happening right now. So one of the ways that leaders can mitigate that recency effect is by implementing regular performance reviews and feedback sessions that help ensure that all relevant information gets gathered and considered over time. So imagine if you're still doing annual performance reviews, the timeline doesn't really matter. What's more important is that during the review period, are you capturing and maybe doing micro reviews, right? So that you're capturing feedback about a person leading up to maybe the formal evaluation. Similarly, you can keep a performance journal. So organizations can encourage their business leaders to keep detailed records of employees' performance throughout that review period so that when it's time to do that evaluation, regardless of what the timeline is, you're able to look back at a more holistic perspective and not get caught focusing so much on what happened most recently, whether that be a positive or a negative thing. Number 6 is stereotyping. Stereotyping occurs when we assume that individuals or groups possess certain characteristics or traits based on generalized beliefs or assumptions about that particular group. This is probably one of the most common biases that we hear about, not just in the workplace, but in society in general. To mitigate the occurrence and impact of stereotyping, organizations should promote diversity and inclusion training and raise awareness about unconscious biases and stereotypes. Companies should encourage employees to challenge their assumptions and engage in open, safe dialogue about perspectives and experiences. This is especially important for business leaders who are making decisions about hiring, firing, promotions, compensations, and things like that, they have to be really careful that their stereotypes aren't influencing how they interpret a team member in their performance, their behavior, their attitude. Any of those things can really influence the perspective that a leader has. And that can also oftentimes lead to a very negative experience for the team member. And when you think about the business as a whole, any of these biases, not only do they create a challenging workplace, in some cases, maybe even a toxic workplace, but they can also result in legal costs and legal challenges and distractions from the business because people are filing claims or accusations against the company for how these biases are affecting them. And oftentimes, if managers have left these biases unchecked, then it leaves too much room for them to show up in their day-to-day business. So make sure that you're taking the time as a business or as a business leader to be mindful of these biases, to check your own biases and preconceived notions that you may hold about your team members or coworkers, and go through proper training. Reach out to your HR department, or if you work with consultants like myself, then use other individuals to help maybe dissect and analyze your perspectives and your decision making so that you've got other perspectives to make sure that you're doing the right thing by your team members and maintaining a safe and compliant workplace.